Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's true crime video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day-to-day, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the truly senseless murder of Darlene Vander Giesen. And when I tell you, I cannot believe the things that I read. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Now, before we get into the details of today's case, I first need to say a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Temu. Temu is an online marketplace that offers competitively priced products in a multitude of different categories. Like, you can literally, well, not literally, you can figuratively buy anything on Temu. You can get home decor, you can get fashion items, you can get beauty items, electronics, kitchenware, kitchen things. You can get everything. Like, okay, you guys know how I've been toying around with the idea of changing my background for YouTube. Well, I got some things from Temu to help me with that task. Let me just show you some of the stuff that I got. I've been playing with wallpapers and also these photo frames to try different things, but it's not just home decor. I also got a new shirt for me, and for Charlie I got these little glow-in-the-dark stars, a stuffed animal hammock, and this little tent dude that he hangs out in and reads his little books. It's so cute. I cannot stand it. Oh, and that little rug that's underneath the tent, I got that for him as well. And for the record, he loves it. I always wanted to get him something like this, and that boy just gets his books and this little blanket and he hangs out in there and he reads. He doesn't read because he can't read. He's not even 2, but he tries his best. Oh, and I totally forgot. Look, I got us both these little slippers so that we can pal around the house together, and the quality of these are actually really good. They both have these like sturdy soles at the bottom, and they're like thick enough that we have worn them out of the house. I haven't worn mine out of the house actually, but he has worn his little slippers out of the house, like to the grocery store, and they're sturdy enough that I'm not worried about him in them. Yeah. Temu seriously just has so many different categories of things that you can get, and the prices just can't be beat because they have site-wide sales with savings up to 90% off. Seriously, everything I got was so affordable, and for a lady in my tax bracket who also has a toddler who is putting them out of house and home with their berry demands, if you know, you know, finding things that are affordable is essential for me. And in the off chance that you don't like something, Temu does have a return policy that lets you return things for up to 90 days. And if that's not good enough for you, which I think it probably is, they also offer free shipping. So if all of that sounds as good to you as it does to me, and you want to check out some of the things I showed you today, or just look for some things that you may be interested in, I have great news. Temu is offering members of the Brat Pack the opportunity to get a $100 coupon bundle when you click the link in my description box and download the Temu app through my link. Or if you want, you can actually go to Temu. Once you download the app, you can go to Temu and you can type in my code, which I will put on the screen for you here, and you still get that $100 coupon bundle to buy any of your new favorite items from Temu today. Now, I just want to say a big thank you to Temu for partnering with me on today's video. It's partners like Temu that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all my sponsors. You rock. Don't ever change. Alright, let's go ahead and get into this video. So this video is on a case that was recommended to me by a member of the Brat Pack named Azrabel? Maybe? Hi, Azrabel. Thank you, Azrabel. Please correct me in the comments if I'm not saying your name correctly. I feel like I probably butchered that one. So, Azrabel, maybe, recommended this case, and I believe it is because this is local to them. I could be wrong on that, but either way, it definitely made an impression on them. And after reading all the details of this case, I can see why, because it made an impression on me too. Darlene's murder was so pointless, so senseless, so just unnecessary, and I mean, we can say that, like, murders across the board are generally very unnecessary, right? But it's just the reason that Darlene was killed, the justification the person who murdered her had was a perceived betrayal that wasn't even real. It was all in this person's head, and Darlene was like an innocent bystander, really. So today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things so that you do not have to, and at the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details of this case, but of course I want you to answer once you have something to go on. But the question of the day is this. Well, I actually have 2. 1, do you believe that the person who killed Darlene should have been given the death penalty? And 2, this is kind of an extension of that, is do you believe that a person who is deaf should automatically have the death penalty taken off the table? Like, do you think that it is appropriate to execute somebody if you believe that the death penalty is appropriate across the board? Anyway, but do you believe that a deaf person should be eligible for the death penalty? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the senseless murder of Darlene Vander Giesen. Our story today begins in late March of 2006, and we are in Beaver Creek, Minnesota, and it is cold. It is icy, it is snowy. Like, the middle of this month was reported to be when the state got the most snow for the entire year. So because of all this snow that the state had gotten and this area had gotten, there was a man named Keith. He was a county worker, and he was out driving a snowplow when he saw something in a ditch on the side of the road that he believed to be garbage. Now, this wasn't the first time that Keith had actually seen this garbage, what he thought was garbage. He had driven by it a couple of times, but each time he did, he kind of was like, that seems weird, but his mind had convinced him that it wasn't, that this wasn't something he needed to look at. But each time he passed it, he kept feeling this way, and finally he got to a point that on this day, at this time, he needed to stop and see what this was. And he said of this decision, quote, "I don't know what possessed me, but it was something that I had to do." So Keith goes back to see what this was, and what he discovered was something that I don't know how a person recovers from finding, because it was the upper torso and head of a woman. And the head of this woman was wrapped in a plastic bag with a cord tied tightly around her neck. And this was the body of 42-year-old Darlene Vander Giesen, a woman who had gone missing from a town 25 miles away. This was in South Dakota, after getting herself wrapped up in a love triangle that she actually played no part in. Now, let's back up a little bit and discuss how we got here. So let's start with talking about Darlene. Darlene was born on July 23rd, 1963, and she was one of two daughters born to parents Dee and Jean, and she was born in Osborne, Kansas, and she was actually born deaf. She and her family lived on a farm near Dispatch, Kansas, until Darlene was about 5 years old when her family moved to Rock Valley, Iowa, which ended up being the place that Darlene grew up. The area she considered her home. This is where she spent her formative years, went to school. She actually ended up attending high school at the Iowa School for the Deaf, where she graduated in 1983. She then lived and worked in Council Bluffs, which I believe is where her school had been, before eventually moving in 1992 to Sioux Falls. Apparently, Darlene had learned that there was like a pretty decently sized deaf community in Sioux Falls, so she moved there for sort of like a sense of family and community. Now, she was super close with her family and her parents, so it wasn't family in that way, but it was just kind of different, you know, because she was born to parents who could hear. So I feel like in a situation like that, obviously without having lived experience myself, you can only understand a person's experience in life so much without actually experiencing it yourself. And even if you experience yourself, it's still going to be a little bit different because everyone is different and processes like life experiences differently. But what was I saying? She moved to this area who had a lot of people who had lived the experience she lived. So that's what this area offered to her, is what I was trying to say. And it really seems like she got what she wanted out of living in this area. Like, she did really well in Sioux Falls. She was friendly and outgoing, and she would go out with like the deaf community. She was very well known in that social circle, but not just in that. She had both deaf friends and hearing friends. She actually had like a lot of friends. She was caring and happy. That was one thing about her. She was a happy person. And after her death, at her funeral, she was said to be the type of person that wanted to bring that little morsel of joy into your life. And every time you would look at a photo of her, you just see this big, toothy smile. She was a religious woman, like she went to church and all that. She also liked collecting Beanie Babies, and she loved animals, especially cats. She loved softball and going to deaf club and camping and playing cards. Once she moved to Sioux Falls, she got a job at this place called JD's House of Trophies, which was basically like a company that made sports trophies and like promotional items, things like that. And she got a job in shipping, and she had worked there for over a decade when she was killed. And the fact that she couldn't hear didn't like slow her down at all in this position. She was super good at like reading lips. So she flourished at this job and was considered to be a model employee. That fact, the fact that she was a model employee, is why it was so weird when in the first week of February of 2006, Darlene didn't show up for work. That was totally unlike her. She wasn't the type to not call and not show, but here she was, not showing up and not calling. So after 2 days of Darlene not showing up for work when she normally would, her boss took it upon himself or herself, theirselves, to call Darlene's parents to see if they had an idea what might be going on. As soon as Darlene's parents heard that she had not shown up for work for 2 days, they were immediately worried, and they started calling her over and over, texting her, because she was more of a texter, and they got no response, like nothing at all. So they immediately loaded themselves up and headed to Sioux Falls to look for Darlene. And they weren't coming from Iowa, which was only an hour away. They were actually at a family event in Nebraska when they got this call. So they literally made the trip from Nebraska all the way to South Dakota, got to Darlene's house, and saw that her car wasn't in the lot. So they didn't panic immediately. They definitely thought the whole thing was weird, but they were like, okay, maybe she went somewhere and that's why her car's not here. But then they have a spare key. So they use the spare key to go into Darlene's home. And though nothing looks outwardly weird, like there's no mess, there's no like sign of somebody being in the house and there being a struggle, nothing like that, there were a couple of things that stood out to them. One of which was the fact that Darlene had pet cats and they didn't seem to have been fed. And that is like not going to happen, right? She loved her cats. But on top of that, her cell phone was just there in the house, like plugged into the wall on the table. And that was super weird. That was incredibly weird. Darlene was not the type of person to not take her phone with her when she left, even for a short trip. And I mean, that's kind of the way everyone is now. And that might have been the way a lot of people were in 2006. I can't really remember. I don't think so. But for Darlene, it was particularly important because she was deaf. So her phone and texting was her way of communicating with the world. So she wouldn't leave without it. And when her family, her parents, went through the phone, they found that she had not used her phone at all. There had been no activity in 2 days. It was on that day, February 3rd, 2006, that Darlene's parents reported her as a missing person, and police quickly came and started processing the scene, and they were considering her to be like a missing person, not just somebody who, ran away, something like that, as we sometimes see. And I don't know if they were considering her to be in danger, at that very moment, but pretty quickly they did start seeing her as being in danger, because once they started processing the scene, they put out like an alert on her car so that people could, be on the lookout for this car. And very soon after, they did receive a call because Darlene's car was found abandoned in a Pizza Hut parking lot. So she clearly wasn't out just driving around doing something, because her car was literally abandoned. And when they searched her car, like none of her stuff was inside, her keys, her ID, her wallet, none of that was inside. But there were like some articles of clothing that belonged to her that she had last been seen wearing, but there was no sign of her. So that's already bad. And police, on top of that, police had looked into her banking activity, and they had seen that there was no activity in days. So they were definitely considering her to be in danger at this point. So they asked the family, they started talking to the family. They're like, we need to figure out what's going on. Do you have any idea what could have happened, how she could have been in danger? Somebody doesn't like her, etc., etc. And they were kind of no, nobody had an issue with her. She was very well loved. The only thing about her life that we could even tell you that could be a lead is that Darlene liked to online date. Like she had profiles across dating websites. Talking isn't going very well for me. 1 second. Her family said that she had been pretty active with internet dating, meeting people offline, all of that, and that her family wasn't happy about it. They were worried about her safety and told her that she just needed to take extra precautions because there were a lot of weirdos out there. And it was actually precious. I saw an interview with her mother, and she's like, excuse my expression for calling people weirdos, which I just thought was very pure and shows like the type of person who raised Darlene. But they couldn't really stop her, you know what I mean? She's in her 40s, she is an adult, this is how she met people. This is how a lot of people meet people. And Darlene wanted to meet somebody. She had a lot of friends, obviously, but she wanted like a steady boyfriend. She wanted a husband, and she had some luck meeting people online. She'd met some people from both the hearing and the deaf community, and she'd gone on some dates. So now police were like, okay, this is probably where we should start, because this opens up a pretty large number of people who could have had access to her. Meanwhile, Darlene's parents are actually staying in her apartment in the, days after Darlene disappeared, so that they can be there for, updates, things like that. And they got a lot of support. A lot of Darlene's friends came over to the apartment and saw them, consoled them, paid their respects. They got to meet a lot of people in Darlene's life that they wouldn't have been privy to if this hadn't happened, because, she's not going to introduce her parents to every single person she knows. And of these new people that her parents were able to meet were two of Darlene's friends, two women who knew Darlene. This was Sally and Daphne. Sally and Daphne were both also deaf women who knew Darlene. Sally and Daphne had actually dated one another, but they were broken up at this point, and Sally lived in the apartment complex that Darlene lived in. So Sally and Darlene were friends, and then Daphne met Darlene through Sally. Both women told her parents they were so sorry, they couldn't believe she was gone. Daphne gave them a hug and said she hoped that Darlene would be back soon and she would pray for them. And I can only imagine in this moment how just having all of these friends come over and see them must have given them some sort, I can't say relief because I can't imagine it's relief, but it just must have felt like a positive feeling. I don't know how you would describe said positive feeling, but a positive feeling to know that your daughter, who's an hour away from you in this new place, I mean, she's been there a while at this point, but that she does have all these people who come out for her and care about her and people who can relate to her. I can imagine that had to be a positive feeling. Anyways, back to the investigation. So police are following up on that internet dating lead, and they start with the most recent man that Darlene had dated. And this is a guy who they were referring to as Jeff. I don't know if that's his actual name. I read something that made me think that it wasn't his actual name, but we'll just call him Jeff, I guess. And he lived about 90 minutes away from Darlene on a farm. Or he worked on a farm. He may have lived on one too. I'm not sure. There's a farm involved, a Jeff involved, perhaps, and 90 minutes away. So police go to try to question him. They want to talk to him, obviously. And when they get there, they find that he's gone too. He has dipped. He's been gone for a couple of days. So police speak to, friends and neighbors of him, people who know him, and they across the board say that it is weird for him to just disappear like this without telling anybody. And no one knows where he is. So police think this is an interesting coincidence, and they even are holding out a little bit of hope that maybe Darlene's off with him. Maybe they went off together, even though her mom was absolutely fucking not. That is not the case. They thought maybe it was possible. Everyone has secrets. I don't know. Maybe she's gone. But that hope would soon be smashed because he came back and Darlene was not with him. So as soon as he came back, police immediately want to question him. They bring him down. They start questioning him. And their first question for him is so where have you been, my guy? You've been gone. She's been gone. What's going on? And he says that he was visiting friends who lived out of town. And the police were kind of that's pretty interesting timing, don't you think? Needless to say, they're feeling a little bit weird about this guy because even if he hadn't disappeared, police are always going to look at the significant other or whoever's been dating them, etc, etc. So they are thinking about him with suspicion. Okay, and they want to search his home. They want to search his truck. They want to look into him. So he does give them permission. He gives them permission to look in his truck. And I can only imagine how their jaws must have needed to be picked up off the floor because they look in his truck and they see something back there that looks to be blood, in the back of the truck. And then they take it and they test it and it turns out it is blood. The police call Darlene's parents and they tell her parents that blood was found in the back of Jeff's car. By the way, it was in his trunk. I was saying truck because Darlene had a truck and my brain just has truck. Little red truck carrying a Christmas tree going through its head, through my head. He had a car. So they called Darlene's parents and say that there was blood found in Jeff's trunk. And of course, this had to be an incredibly deflating thing to hear, but they were going to have to wait for the test to come back to confirm whether or not this blood belonged to Darlene. But when the tests came back, they found that this blood did not belong to Darlene. It wasn't even human blood. It was deer blood. And on top of that, Jeff had a pretty solid alibi for the time that Darlene was believed to have gone missing. He had been on this trip out of town. He had receipts. He had checks he had written, and everything checked out. So they moved on to their next lead, and they already kind of had something in mind, something that they were looking into, because they had been looking through Darlene's internet history. And in looking through her internet history, they found that Darlene had been having issues with a woman named Wendy. Wendy had been sending her some pretty nasty emails, just saying rude stuff to her, calling her dumb and fat and ugly and smelly, and telling her to like stay away from the apartment complex where she lived, telling her to stay out of her life, to get away from Wendy's lover. She would literally put in the subject lines of these emails like phrases like "I hate you." It was just some really vile shit. So police were like, okay, we should probably look into this Wendy person. And they had a lead on where to start. Now, I have no idea how they're able to figure this out. Well, I do, and I'm going to tell you. But when I first read this, I had no idea how they were able to figure this out. And they were able to determine by the writing style of the emails that the person who sent the emails was likely deaf. I was just like, how could they possibly be able to tell this by an email? But, okay, apparently, from what I've learned from looking into this case, is in the deaf community, when you, like, conversational English is not spoken the same, like it doesn't translate the same when it's written out. One detective that was interviewed for an episode of Forensic Files that I watched on this case said that they speak in unstructured sentences to just basically get their words and their point across. So it's just totally different. And I read some of the emails and it is totally different, and that's how the email was written. So that's a lead. It doesn't really narrow things down that much since, Darlene was deaf and had a lot of friends in the deaf community, but it was at least a start. So police start questioning friends and family of Darlene to see, who was Wendy. They were trying to track down Wendy, and they find out that no one knows who Wendy is. And according to Darlene's family, even Darlene herself did not know who Wendy was and was actually trying to figure it out, but hadn't yet. But police were going to have a little more success in figuring out who Wendy was because they have, more assets than the average bear. So they actually subpoenaed the internet provider for this email, which was Yahoo, so that they could figure out who this email belonged to. And they were able to trace this email to the home of a woman named Jackie, a woman who was not yet on police's radar at all. So, with that information, police contact this woman named Jackie, and they tell her they'd like her to come down to the police station so that they could question her about the disappearance of a woman named Darlene Vander Giesen. And Jackie's kind of taken aback because she's like, I have never met Darlene. Are you sure that you're not trying to get in contact with my roommate? Because my roommate does know Darlene. Now, I'm going to give you a second to put down below who you believe her roommate is, because it is somebody that we have discussed throughout this video so far in passing, but perhaps, you have an idea of who this may be. I will wait for a second so you can put it in the comments, or if you want to pause me and then put it in the comments and then come back. I'm kind of filibustering here to give you a moment to put your guess. Okay. Her roommate was a woman named Daphne Wright. Yes, Daphne, as in Daphne and Sally, as in the friends who visited Darlene's parents after Darlene went missing. So police are like, actually, you know what? How about both of you come down for questioning? And both women voluntarily do. So I don't know a ton about Jackie's interview. I know some stuff that comes out that we'll get into when we get into the trial, but we're going to be talking about Daphne's interview from here on out. Well, not from here on out, but for this given time, because that's the person that we're talking about here now. That's where our line of discussion has brought us. So Daphne sits down with police with an interpreter so that they can have a conversation. And the first thing they ask her is just kind of like, so, can you tell me about your relationship with Darlene? And she tells police that she had met Darlene at the ASL club and that they had become well acquainted, that she often saw her around. She would see her at the apartments all the time because, her ex-girlfriend Sally lived there. And she said her and Darlene were friends, they were buddies, they had a good relationship, but police already knew at this point that that wasn't the case. So, let me give you a little backstory on Daphne. Daphne, as I said before, in case you don't remember, is deaf, like Darlene, but she wasn't born deaf. She actually was able to hear for the first 10 months of her life, but when she was 10 months old, she contracted rubella, which is also called the German measles. It's like, a rash, and she actually went deaf from this illness at just like the young age of a baby, not even 1 year old, which is already, a hard thing to grow up with because you can't hear. It's something that most people get to do and that her parents had always done. So they had lived their lives in a hearing way and had to adapt to that. And that would already be difficult. But on top of that, she was born to a family that had a father who was an alcoholic and was abusive to her mother. Throughout her life, Daphne faced rejection from other kids and even some members of her extended family. She even experienced some, perceived rejection from her parents when they had to leave her at a school for deaf children, 120 miles away from their home in North Carolina. And this, like being left at this school, was said to be incredibly traumatic for her, which would be incredibly traumatic for a child, because apparently she had like no idea what was going on. So when they took her to the school, you know, they went inside and they tried to leave. She was confused. She didn't know what was happening. So she tried to go with them. She didn't understand that she was being left there. And so they left, they get in the car and they start driving away, and she freaks out and she just starts screaming and crying and chasing their car. Now, I'm not sure how long she was at this school. I believe she was back by the time she was a teenager, because there are reports that she went into a pretty bad depression when she was a teenager. So I think she was probably home, and that's why her parents knew about this, or her mother knew about this, because the depression happened after her father actually died of cancer, which is another very traumatic thing to happen. There were a lot of traumas. There's a lot of things that went bad in the beginning of Daphne's life, but I don't think they're an excuse to do what she did, because I mean, like, spoiler alert, I guess. I feel like you've caught on at this point that Daphne is who did this to Darlene. But her mom said that there wasn't anything when she was younger that would point to this. She wasn't like a problem child at all. Nothing like that. Her mom said that she, you know, did fine in sports, but wasn't the best at reading. Her mental, like, intelligence capacity, whatever you want to call it, I don't know the proper term for that, it was kind of in question. She had a couple evaluations throughout her life. One said that she was below average, but then she had another one that said her nonverbal IQ was above average. So there was nothing extraordinary in either direction. She was just like fine. Well, you know, besides like the depression that she went into, which is a reasonable thing to go into after losing a parent, she was fine. The only other issue she really had growing up was kind of, you know, coming into her sexuality, because she was a gay woman. You know, she had realized by the time we're talking about her that she was a gay woman, but growing up, you know, it took her a little bit to get there. She dated some boys, but after a bit of time, she realized like that wasn't really for her. She wasn't about the dude life. You know what I mean? She was like, I like chicks, and she wanted to find her one. So she started dating women, and by the time she was an adult, she was, you know, dating women exclusively, and she had been in a couple relationships here and there, even some like longer term ones, but none of them were to her as serious, and she wasn't as intense about as she was with the woman named Sally, who we talked about earlier. To Daphne, her and Sally seemed like a good match. It seemed like good timing. You know, she was older by this time. I think she was in her like late 30s, early 40s by the time they were like in an established relationship, and she just felt like this was such a good match. Like, she and Sally were both deaf. They could, you know, bond over shared life experience. They were really into each other. It just seemed perfect. So they got together. Things moved fast, and they ended up moving in together. They actually ended moving in with Daphne's friend Jackie, right? Jackie, the one who police call and are like, hey, we want to talk to you about Darlene. Well, it turns out that Jackie, in addition to being Daphne's friend and roommate, she was also Daphne's ex-girlfriend. So I guess what happened there is that Jackie and Daphne met online in like a chat room, and they talked for a while online before finally Jackie took a plane to Daphne in Maryland, which is where she was living at the time, and a relationship ensued. She like stayed. She's like, cool, we're together, this is cool. But then in October of 2000, Jackie and Daphne, thank you, Brittany, thanks to me, I want to thank me. They moved together back to Sioux Falls, and within 2 years of living there, the relationship had already ended. So Daphne's back on the dating scene when she meets Sally. And Sally, I believe they met online because Sally's living in Wisconsin at the time. So Daphne goes to Wisconsin and is staying with Sally there, but within a little bit of time, I think it was 2 years. It was also 2 years. They decide they want to leave Wisconsin and move back to Sioux Falls, where they end up moving in with Jackie. I guess they wanted to move there because, I mean, Daphne knew from living there for a time that they had a strong deaf community, and they also wanted to look for work, for jobs, which is ironic because Daphne was said to be the type of person who didn't really work. She would like occasionally work odd jobs, but mostly just accepted governmental assistance and played video games all day. But the plan was to move there to get jobs, and they were going to be moving in with Daphne's friend / ex, Jackie. So Daphne and Sally lived with Jackie for a little bit over a year, and as I'm sure you can imagine, it was a little bit awkward. And whether it be because of the prior relationships involved in everybody or just conflicting personalities, I can't say for sure, but Sally and Jackie did not get along. They fought often, and Jackie said that Sally was lazy and had a temper. So Jackie and Sally would fight, which would lead to Sally and Daphne fighting. And I'm sure that Sally and Daphne had their own issues as well. And whether it be their issues or the tension in the house, I can't know for sure. Again, I don't know these people. I'm just telling you what I know from all the things that I've read. But what ended up happening is they moved to Sioux Falls, and by 2004, the two broke up. This was in September of 2004 that the two broke up. So Daphne had a really hard time with this breakup. She had a hard time accepting that it was over to herself or even to other people. She told people they were still together. And it's probably because it was just hard, you know what I mean? Like, they were together 5 years. It would be hard for a relationship like that to end. And it would be particularly hard because they were still like being friends. They hung out together almost every weekend, even though they were broken up. So, since Jackie was Daphne's friend and not Sally's friend, it was Sally who ended up moving out of the apartment that the three shared. And she ended up moving into an apartment complex called Timberland Village. And this was an apartment complex that had a large deaf community. And it had so many deaf people living in the apartment complex that it was actually referred to as just the deaf apartments. Now, it was at this apartment complex that during an apartment member game of cards that Sally met Darlene. Darlene, another deaf woman that she could bond with and become friends with, and Daphne was not happy about this. As soon as she found out that Sally was hanging out with a new woman, she was pissed. She could not accept that they were just friends. She 100% believed that they were into each other romantically and physically, despite the fact that Darlene was dating a man, had exclusively dated men, and was by all accounts a straight woman. But Daphne, man, she had trouble understanding why the two were not together. She was in love with Sally and convinced that they were meant to be together. So she's like, because we're meant to be together, the only thing that could be coming between us is this new person, Darlene. And instead of looking inward and being like, maybe I'm the problem, maybe I'm the drama, maybe we just really aren't that good for each other, she started just blaming others. And the others she was blaming was Darlene. There was no others, it was just Darlene. Since Sally and Daphne were still friends, this was something that would come up a lot. And Sally told her, she wanted the relationship between the two of them to be over. She wanted to date other people. She was just trying to be honest. And Daphne's response was always just well, you obviously just want to date Darlene. She couldn't understand that, no. She just wanted to not date you, Daphne. And Sally felt very smothered by Daphne. She was obsessive and just couldn't get this idea out of her head, even though it was totally false. And Daphne's suspicions were confirmed, not actually confirmed, but confirmed to her in her mind when one day, after the two had broken up and very shortly before Darlene went missing, Daphne shows up at Sally's apartment unannounced. She knocks on the door, Sally opens the door, and Daphne sees Darlene in Sally's apartment, and she fucking loses it. She goes off, she gets mad, she starts yelling. Her and Darlene start fighting, and Daphne's just screaming at her, telling her that, she's ruining her relationship. Why are you ruining our relationship? Flipping her off, etc., etc. And Darlene gets to a point where she's like, I'ma head out. This is not for me. This is not my business. This is not my fight. I'm gonna go. Once Darlene was gone, the fight then continued between Daphne and Sally, and it kept escalating and escalating, and Sally kept telling Daphne to leave, this is my home, you need to leave, but she refused. So Sally actually left the apartment. She goes to a neighbor's, she calls the cops come, and they have to convince Daphne, or use their authority to get Daphne to leave Sally's house. And as she left, she told Sally, you will regret this. And now Darlene is missing, and Daphne is sitting across from these police officers telling them that her and Darlene were buds, were friends. And police are that's really weird considering the things that we know already, and the emails that we believe you sent. She denied sending any emails, though. She said she didn't know how to. She must have been hacked. She denied it and denied it and denied it. But after being pushed, and then the officer straight up telling her, I don't believe you. I think you know exactly who sent these emails because it was you. She was finally you know what, fine. Yeah, I did that. I made a fake email with a fake name so I could send these messages to Darlene. But even though she admitted to sending the emails, she stayed firm to saying she had nothing to do with the disappearance at all. But she did change her story several times, which helped police know they were, on the right track. First, she said that she had last seen Darlene at the end of January, hadn't even seen her in February, and she had no idea why Darlene's car would be at the Pizza Hut. This is her first story. Then she said, oh, you know what, actually, I did have plans to meet Darlene at the Pizza Hut on February 1st, which is the day that Darlene went missing. We were going to go there, we were going to meet up, and we were going to talk about a Valentine's Day surprise for Sally, but I actually didn't show up because I ran out of gas. And then she's like, okay. I did show up. She and I stood outside. We talked for 5 minutes in the parking lot, never even went in. And then I left, and I assumed that she left, and that's the last time I saw her. The cops asked her, like, why are you changing your story so much? You go from not meeting her at all to meeting her in the parking lot, but not going inside because you didn't have money to eat. And she's like, I keep changing my story because I'm freaked out that you guys are blaming me. But no matter how much they push her, she says, I'm not guilty of everything, of anything. And she even tells police that Darlene had never been in her vehicle. And that seems random, but it does matter because police had already, I don't know if they had already or if they were going to and in the process of searching her vehicle, but they did find blood on her back bumper and it was determined to be a match for Darlene. So from there, police realized that Daphne's the person they need to be looking into. They've found like their person. So they get a warrant to search her house, and while they're searching the home, they keep her at the police station. And they're finding some things that are not good. Inside her room, they find a receipt for a chainsaw that was purchased on February 3rd, right after Darlene went missing, but the chainsaw is missing. And this was not the time of year where one would need or buy a chainsaw, which was notable, as if it wouldn't already be notable that you're buying a chainsaw after someone goes missing. They also found black trash bags, a receipt for black trash bags, chainsaw oil, and a lot of cleaning products. Inside the basement, which reeked of cleaning products, they found that somebody had been doing some like home improvement. And by home improvement, I mean that they had been doing some painting. But it wasn't like they painted, the entire room. There was just like spots of blue paint, like a spot here on the wall painted blue, a spot here on the floor painted blue. And in this little room that was in the basement that had been used as a coal room, the entire floor was painted blue and it was still soft and tacky. So the police were kind of like, what's under here? And they like scraped to see, and it was covering up blood. So that is already bad, but they also note that on the floor of the basement, there were striation marks that looked like there were marks from a chainsaw in the floor of the basement. And on the wall in this coal room, they saw what looks to be and turned out to be bone fragments, muscle, tissue, and blood. So all of this was taken to be tested, and 2 days later, the results came back, and all of this was a match for Darlene. And they were able to tell that this was a match for Darlene without even having her body because they were able to get her DNA from her toothbrush and her hairbrush. They had to then bring in Darlene's parents and give them the news. And her mom said that she just knew it was bad news as soon as she got brought in, as they bring them into this room with like all the detectives and the chief of police, the whole nine. And she just knew like this couldn't be for good news. And then they learn that their daughter is gone and in this way. And I can't imagine being them. Like her dad talked about the last time he saw her and how she like wrapped him up in this big hug with her big arms and then told him that she loved him in sign language. And now they're just learning that she's gone forever. I just cannot imagine being her parents in this situation and knowing that this woman who did this had came to you and held you and consoled you. And her parents had known that there had been some drama between Darlene and Daphne because Darlene had told them, but Darlene had also told them that like they had buried the hatchet and that things were fine. And now they were finding out that that wasn't the case at all. And her mother said of this quote, "She gave me a hug and she said she was sorry that Darlene was missing, that they were friends, and she would be praying that we would find Darlene soon. And I thanked her for coming." That's just so traumatizing. So, as I'm sure you can imagine, less than 2 weeks after Darlene went missing, Daphne was arrested, and she was charged with first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and aggravated kidnapping. When it first came out that Darlene was more than likely not missing, but dead, this was so shocking to people because she was not the type of person to have any enemies. Her friends were just like, why anyone would want to kill her is beyond me. She is literally delightful. She was never the type to get upset, get mad. There was like nothing negative about her, and they just said they wanted her back. But they didn't know where she was, and Daphne wasn't admitting anything, so police knew that they needed to try to recover her body here because she wasn't making a confession, and they could tell by the evidence that she had more than likely been dismembered and then disposed of. So police start their search, and they know that their first course of action needs to be looking at the trash cans and the dumpsters, near Daphne's home. So they do that, but they don't have any luck because the trash has already been picked up. So this leads them to the Sioux Falls landfill, and this is a daunting task because it's 470 acres. It services 5 counties and like 250,000 people. Their trash goes to this landfill. And on top of that, it was estimated that during the time that Darlene went missing, there was probably 200 to 300 tons of garbage put into that landfill. Not to mention that it is freezing. It is February in South Dakota. It is below 0 degrees, but people are still out there searching with their hands and pitchforks and machinery. And man, they really searched that landfill, going through bag after bag before finally, 5 days after the search began, they found what they were looking for. They found a pair of legs that had been cut below the knee and the lower torso of a woman. And they knew right away that this was Darlene, because first off, who else would it be? What are the odds that another person would be here? Very, very low. And I mean, it was so clear to them that they listed her. They listed this body that they found as Jane Doe / Darlene VanderGiesen. And if finding her body wasn't enough, it was the stuff that they found with her body as well. They found bloody pieces of carpet, bed sheets, coal dust, rope. They found carpet fibers. They found an extension cord that would have been used for a chainsaw. And this extension cord was shoved inside of a bag with an ASL sweatshirt that had DNA on it. It was blood spattered for one, and it had 2 DNA profiles on it. Darlene's and Daphne's. Darlene's was the blood on the outside, and Daphne's DNA was on the inside of the sweater because she was likely the one who was wearing it. So they found all of this in the landfill, and during this time, Daphne is, of course, in custody, and we're awaiting trial. And while we are awaiting trial, that's when more of Darlene's body parts, for lack of a better word, were recovered, because it looked like she had been dismembered and then scattered. Because remember, Keith, that county county worker in Minnesota, had recovered parts of Darlene, her torso for one, which was mostly like intact. There was a little bit of decomposition on parts of the body that had been exposed to more of the elements, and the arm was broken in a couple of places, but it was mostly intact. And then he also recovered her head, which was, wrapped with a plastic bag with a cord wrapped around her neck. And this cord was important because the cord that was used to wrap around Darlene's neck was found on the wall, like a spool of this cord was found on the wall in Daphne's garage. So they were able to connect it that way. In addition to that, her face, like when the bag was removed, her hair and her body had the smell of petroleum on it and had signs of charring, including her bra, because whoever did this, which was Daphne, which they knew this, but so let's just say Daphne tried to set her on fire, tried to burn her before apparently just giving up and dismembering her. Like, the bag that was around her head was like stuck to her neck because it had been on the body when she tried to burn it. And I actually don't think I mentioned this before, but when the police searched Daphne's home, like when they were doing that initial search and they scraped that blue paint off the floor and they recovered blood underneath, they also released like the strong smell of petroleum when they lifted up that paint. From the remains that were recovered, they were able to do an autopsy. And from the autopsy, they uncovered that Daphne had attacked Darlene, put a plastic bag over her head, and tied a cord around her neck in an attempt to suffocate her. And in addition to that, she had some blunt force trauma. So they were not able to determine exactly what her cause of death was. They said it was either from suffocation or from a beating, because she had a 7-inch skull fracture to her head, or a combination of the two, but they couldn't tell which thing happened first. After death, Daphne attempted to burn Darlene's body, but when this wasn't successful, she kept Darlene's body in her house for 2 days before finally getting some money, going to the hardware store, getting a chainsaw, and dismembering her. So Daphne was arrested, as I said, and she was facing the death penalty. And if she had actually received the death penalty, she would have been like the first female defendant in South Dakota to receive it. Like, she was the first female in South Dakota to be in a capital punishment case. And she actually was executed. If they went through with the execution, she'd be the first to be executed in the state, in decades. Like, there were 4 men at this time who were on death row, but none of them had been executed yet. And if she was put on death row, she would have been the very first deaf woman in U.S. history to be put on death row. Oh man, the death and the deaf is getting me right now. Now, this decision to go after the death penalty was seen as controversial in this case. A lot of people were like, you're really gonna execute a deaf person? To which I say, deaf people, love them. My sister is hearing impaired, and ASL has been like a thing in my life and existence like throughout my life. And I still say that that shouldn't play a part in whether or not Daphne gets the death penalty. Like, I do not believe it applies, personally. But her attorney tried to say that it did for sure. He said to execute a deaf person would be cruel and unusual punishment, which is like, you know, a thought. But the prosecution said of this quote, "We don't have different rules for different people. We don't have different rules for different groups." And it wasn't just the prosecution who felt this way. Many disability rights activists actually agreed with the prosecution, saying that equal rights for deaf people mean equal treatment everywhere, including the courtroom. And the president of the American Association of People with Disabilities, his name was Andrew, he said that Daphne didn't deserve any leniency because of her deafness. And he said of this quote, "I think it's very dangerous to argue that deaf people, as a general matter, shouldn't be eligible for the death penalty." He then added, quote, "Making that argument involves saying that they are not aware of the consequences of their actions. It can reinforce stereotypes and lead to discrimination against deaf people." Anyways, the trial started the following year in April of 2007, and it did go a little differently than most trials do because of Daphne being deaf. Like, there were a bunch of interpreters in the courtroom, for instance, to make sure she understood what was going on and make sure she could communicate with her attorneys. They also had a projector in the courtroom so that every word spoken would be up on the screen, and it was recorded so that Daphne and her team could go back and look at it, and it also had the interpreter in the video to make sure like everything was, on the up and up. And Daphne was given the ability to stop the proceedings at any time if she needed to so that she could like catch up. But even with those accommodations, there still was an argument as to whether or not this was fair, and it was like a challenging thing. A lot of scholars and like clinical professionals agreed across the board that deaf people do have a disadvantage in the courtroom, but they disagree on whether or not this disadvantage can be like overcome. Because, for example, it takes longer to say something in ASL than it does in like spoken word, and there are some like legal words, ideas, you know what I mean, that don't have like an ASL, I don't know why I'm doing this, an ASL counterpart, you know what I mean? Like, they said that manslaughter and murder could be signed the same way, so there are distinctions that can't be made through ASL, essentially. But all of that aside, the trial did continue, and the prosecution had a lot of evidence against Daphne. They had her interrogation footage where she admitted that she was the last person to see Darlene alive and that she had seen her at the Pizza Hut where her truck had been abandoned, like where Darlene's vehicle was found abandoned. They also had all the evidence from her home, the blood and tissue and bone in the basement, the chainsaw oil, the receipt from, I believe it was Ace Hardware. It's a hardware store where the chainsaw was purchased, and the police even went to this hardware store and confirmed with somebody who worked there that the person who came in to get the chainsaw was a deaf black female, and this person was able to pick Daphne out of a photo lineup. This employee said that Daphne had come into the hardware store with a note written out that just said, quote, "tree cutting machine," and that this person then ended up leading her to the chainsaws, and that Darlene chose the cheapest one for $52.99 and purchased it. And she seemed a little bit nervous about the price. I guess Daphne hadn't had a lot of money and like waited for money to go into her account, and then immediately went out and bought this chainsaw. So that could be why it took her 2 days with the body in the house, because she like didn't have the money to help her dispose of Darlene. The prosecution had the black bags similar to the ones that Daphne bought with the remains. Bed sheets and blankets from Daphne's home were found with the remains in both places, and one of the sheets had coal dust on it from Darlene being dismembered in the coal room. They had carpet fibers found next to the body in both the landfill and the ditch that were similar to fibers from Daphne's house, and the cord wrapped around Darlene's neck matched the cord that was in Daphne's garage. But the defense tried, they have to, that is their job. And they really seem to have an approach of throwing every single thing at the wall and seeing what stuck. Like they were that one macaroni noodle from your Kraft mac and cheese that you throw at the wall, it sticks, and it ends up becoming a fixture of your home that stays there the entire time you live there. And inevitably, when you move out, your landlord just paints over it and it becomes part of the architecture of the home. It was kind of like that, and in most ways, not like that at all. They tried to say because of the issues that Daphne experienced growing up with her father and the way confrontation was handled, that she didn't learn how to handle problems. She didn't learn how to handle issues head on. So that's why she took drastic measures to eliminate a problem that may have been in her life. They also tried to imply that Darlene's death could have been an accident, that her and Daphne could have gotten in a fight in Daphne's home, and that she fell down the stairs into the basement, hit her head, and that's what killed her, and that Daphne just panicked and cleaned up after the fact. And they even tried to get a doctor to testify to this idea that Darlene had gotten the head injury prior to the plastic bag being put on her head, and that Darlene was already dead, and then she put the plastic bag on and then tied it around her neck. And even the doctor was like, yeah, I just really don't believe that's what happened though, and they wouldn't testify to it. The defense even tried to provide the jury with an alternative suspect. They tried to see if they could make the jury believe that Daphne's ex, Sally, was the one who was responsible. They said that, I guess, a t-shirt was found in the landfill, and this t-shirt was a Wells Fargo t-shirt, and that Sally had worked at Wells Fargo. So the defense was asking, like, the police people, professionals, on the stand, like, why didn't you test this t-shirt to see if perhaps Sally was the killer? And the cop was like, listen, we had 400 pieces of evidence and everything wasn't tested, everything feasibly, and money. We don't have the money to test everything, basically, is what he was saying. And the defense was like, well, maybe it should have been tested, because did you also know that in Darlene's address book, the letters C and D were ripped out, and that could be because she ripped out Sally's contact information, because Sally's last name started with the C, so maybe they had a fallout and she ripped it out and you didn't even check, so maybe there was something going on there. And the cop was like, I guess that could be true, but she could have also ripped out the D, because D is for Daphne. But then they also said, maybe it wasn't Sally at all, maybe it was instead one of these mystery men that Darlene met on the internet. The defense said that the police had made too much out of the emails that Daphne sent to Darlene, that they were childish words that were somehow spun into a death threat. And the only real evidence that police had presented was that Daphne had cleaned up after Darlene was dead, but they hadn't proven at all that Daphne was the one who killed her. And the defense even said of this quote, "Once a person is deceased, the crime is done." To which I say, I don't really know if that is true, because isn't abusing the corpse after the fact considered a crime? Is that not the case in South Dakota? Let me know, because I thought chopping up a body with a chainsaw was also a crime. But maybe I'm dumb here. But again, the prosecution had a ton. They had everything I mentioned before, and they also had the fact that both Sally, Daphne's ex, and Jackie, Daphne's ex/roommate, both testified. When Sally came to the stand, Daphne tried to keep her cool. You could tell she was trying to keep it together. She popped in a piece of gum and was chewing the gum. But as Sally testified, Daphne did start to cry, and Sally cried too. She cried as she told the court about the fight between Daphne and Darlene shortly before Darlene went missing. She told them about when she told Daphne Darlene was missing, and Daphne had no real reaction. She told the court that when her and Daphne went over to see Darlene's parents to pay their respects, Daphne really wanted to get out of there right away. And she told them that the day that Daphne was believed to have dismembered Darlene, she had been with her after the fact, and they were watching movies together, and Daphne seemed super nervous and was chain smoking. She said she was smoking a cigarette every minute, which is probably an exaggeration, because I don't think that's possible. And it's been 5 years since I quit smoking, but I used to smoke a pack a day, and I couldn't do a cigarette every minute even if I wanted to. But she said she seemed very nervous. When she would ask her what was wrong, she would say nothing. Then Jackie testified. Daphne's roommate, the woman whose home it was that Darlene was killed in, and she told the court that on February 3rd, Daphne was doing some weird shit. She had been down in the basement for a long time, and she was taking stuff out. She was taking out like strips of carpet and plastic bags full of stuff and like chunks of concrete. And when Jackie asked her about this, because reasonably I would do the same, be like, what's going on, bud? Because she's taking all the stuff and putting it in the car. She said that she was just taking a bunch of trash to the dump, but then she was gone for a couple of hours. This trial was intense. I cannot imagine being her parents. I cannot imagine being her mother. They showed, like photos of her body and the condition that it was in, and when these were passed around and like shown in court, her mom had to leave crying. Again, when they were passing around Darlene's like burnt bra, her mom again had to leave crying. She couldn't do it. She was able to stay in the courtroom while Keith, the county worker, testified and told the court about finding Darlene on the side of the road wrapped in trash bags and bed sheets. And then she had to hear that her daughter's face was like visible, and you could tell that it was her when she was found, that she still looked like herself, probably due to the cold. This trial was so intense that the prosecution even tried to have a video shown in court of a pig carcass being cut up with a chainsaw to show the jury what this would have been like. The judge, thankfully, ended up being like, no, I don't think we're going to need that. And they didn't let this video be shown, because I can only imagine how traumatic that would be. Like, we don't need a visual. It's bad enough in our heads, you know what I mean? But all of this was just like so heavy. Indeed, Darlene's mom just cried and cried, and Daphne the whole time sat there cool, calm, and collected, and she never testified. She never got on the stand. The prosecution told the jury that Daphne had murdered Darlene and then dismembered her body as a result of a depraved mind, and she should therefore be given the death sentence. And the defense said that, that's not what happened. She didn't kill her, and she didn't cut up her body for any sort of depraved pleasure or anything like that. She only did it to try to get Darlene's body out of the basement. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury came back with their verdict, and they told the court that they had decided that Daphne Wright was guilty of the aggravated kidnapping and murder of Darlene. And when the jury foreman read out the verdict, Daphne finally did cry. She started to cry, and the DA, the prosecutor, turned to Darlene's parents and just gave them, like a somber nod. Now, at this point, the jury was let out of the courtroom so that the judge and the attorneys could discuss what was going to happen next. And what was going to happen next is that Daphne was going to be sentenced, but it was going to take a little bit of time, because once the jury was summoned to come back with their recommendation, they said they needed some more time because they needed to compose themselves, because this whole situation had been so traumatizing. But when they did come back, they did say that the prosecution had proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Daphne had a depravity of the mind, which meant she could be eligible for the death penalty. But they decided instead to recommend that she be given life in prison with no possibility of parole. And after the fact, a couple of the jurors said that they felt that they needed to show Daphne the mercy that Daphne did not show to Darlene. So with that, Daphne Wright was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Darlene's mother, spoke directly to Daphne when she said, quote, "We pray for you every day, asking that God may touch your heart, that you may come to know his love, and that you repent of your sins and seek God's forgiveness." She's a bigger woman than me. I will say that, because she even spoke to Daphne's mother directly, consoling her, saying, quote, "As one mother to the other, I express my sorrow to your family. We both have lost our daughters, one to death and the other to prison time for as long as she lives. May God's grace be shown to you at this time of pain in your life." I can honestly cry. I can't imagine being this woman, and I can't imagine just having the presence of mind to care about the mother of the person who killed your child. I don't know what I would be like in this situation, obviously. Maybe I would feel that too, but I just feel like, knowing myself, I would just be so filled with rage that it would be hard to compartmentalize that way. But she was able to. Now, seems like we should be done, but we're not quite done, because as we often see in these cases, Daphne did appeal. Basically, her and her attorneys argued that her statements in her interrogation should have been thrown out since she had not been Mirandized and did not have an attorney, but she was not under arrest and she was free to leave, so that didn't apply. She also had an issue with a lack of black jurors and the fact that the trial brought up her prior fight with Darlene, the fact that she believed kidnapping had not been proven by sufficient evidence and therefore murder could not be proven by evidence, to which I say, ma'am, her blood, her bones, her body, pieces of her body were found in your basement. I think we are past that. And one other thing that I found to be interesting is that her attorneys were claiming that by charging her both with aggravated kidnapping and murder, they were basically, how did they word it? They were claiming double jeopardy, which I thought that was the most interesting claim to read about, at least because I've never heard anybody try that. Daphne and her attorneys tried to say that because the aggravated kidnapping charge and the murder charge arose from the same event, that it violated double jeopardy, that she was like charged with both and convicted of both. And the appeals court like really just completely disregarded this argument. If you read the appeal, which I did, they have like these long paragraphs of their reasoning for disagreeing with like every point in the appeal, except for this one. This one they just kind of gloss over and they're like, listen, this is stupid. This is bullshit. You weren't even punished for both. You just got life in prison without parole. It's not like we gave you double life, you know? So let's just chill. That was a paraphrase, but all of that is to say that she was unsuccessful in her appeal and she is still in jail, where I believe she belongs. This case, man, this case is somehow really simple and also really complicated for me. I think the part that makes it complicated in my mind is the legal part, actually not like the crime, because I think it's pretty straightforward what happened, but the legality of it, because in a lot of ways, the court system really isn't designed for the hearing impaired. I think that was apparent in reading everything that I read, and that could make it so her trial wasn't considered fair. Because you know how like when people are having mental health issues, they look at it to see if somebody is fit to help their attorneys with their defense. Like that is something, which obviously somebody who is deaf is not in the same camp as somebody who is like not mentally able to, but they are in some ways not able to assist with their defense when they can't communicate efficiently with their attorneys and with everything going on. So I think that that is something to note, but at the same time, I like 100% think that she did it, and I think that it was intentional. Like when I was researching, I read some theories on this message board where somebody posted that like perhaps it was an accident. Maybe they did get into a fight and maybe she did fall down the stairs. Maybe she even pushed her. Like maybe that did happen and it wasn't on purpose. And then when she fell down, she was dead and she's like, oh shit, I do need to get rid of this body, but it wasn't premeditated. But when I really started to think about it, I feel like me feeling like that could be the reality was just a bias for me, because I do have this inherent like softness towards anybody with any sort of impairment. I mean, I know people in my life who are hearing impaired. My sister's hearing impaired. So just across the board, I have this softness towards people who have a struggle that they have to deal with. But when I stepped back and I looked at this, I was like, no, like she did this on purpose. There was a bag tied around this woman's head with a cord, and there would be no reason to do this unless she was alive when it happened, which is so dark and so horrifying to consider. And I definitely think that she is in jail where she belongs, but the question is, does she deserve life in prison or the death penalty? And I think that is where the yo-yoing of opinion is going to be in this case. But I think most everyone here will agree that she did it, and she did it for one reason and one reason only. A very simple reason, one of the oldest reasons. Pure, simple, misguided jealousy. And with that, my friends, is the story of the murder of Darlene Vander Giesen. I hope you found my presentation of this case to be informative, and I hope it made sense. And of course, I just want to thank you for remembering Darlene with me today. Now, considering everything that I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that is this. Do you believe that Daphne was given an appropriate sentence for the murder of Darlene? And do you think that a person being deaf should automatically make it so that the death penalty is taken off the table for them? What do you think about that? Because it definitely is divisive, and there was a lot of discussion about that when it came to this case. So I'm kind of curious what you guys think. So let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. Anyways, guys, before you leave, don't forget to leave me a comment down below with what case you would like to see me cover in the future. As this case shows, if you leave me a comment with a case suggestion, I do try to get to it. And when you leave me a suggestion, I put your name on my list next to the case so that if I cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest because they're often cases I haven't heard of, like this one, and need more coverage. And I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, like this week. And I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us, one of us, one of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership. Everything's down there for you. I want to say one last thank you to Temu for partnering with me on today's video. It's partners like Temu that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors and of my channel just across the board. You guys are great. You know, you rock. Don't ever change. And now with all that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday. And I hope to see you in my next video.